Youyansu Tan, and I'm a high school student at United World College, Southeast Asia in Singapore. And my research paper is titled Reviving French Arpitan, Recommendations to Revitalization Efforts. So in this research paper, I will be first going through my introduction, a personal introduction to the topic, why it is important, and I will be briefly giving an overview of history of French language policies. And third, I'll be talking about the current revitalizations of the language, and then combining the current situation of the language with revitalization efforts. I will be analyzing a few of the impediments to revitalization and as well as the positive conditions for revitalizations. At last, combining all of them together, I will be giving some recommendations to revitalization efforts, where to direct these efforts, and how to distribute resources, etc. In the recent years, language endangerment has been a more and more popular topic in the linguistic community. So language endangerment is defined as a declining number of speakers. This can be due to a lot of social reasons, but the French Arpitan is one of the endangered languages in the world. The UNESCO Atlas of the World Languages in Danger classifies it as severely endangered. And to give off some bit of context, the language is spoken in the southeast area of France at the crossroads of Switzerland and Italy. As you can see from the figure 1, Arpitan and its varieties, the language exhibits a high linguistic variety throughout the region. So even when it's like classified as one language, it has a lot of, you can say, sub-dialects or sub-varieties across the region in which it is spoken. In some cases, so extreme that one village would speak the language in a different way than a village a few miles away. So the language is very unique, and now I'll be going over through the history of the French language policies to give off the context of why language endangerment is a problem in France today, and how is this applicable in the context of Arpitan. So the history of language policies is very important because a negative view or a negative history enforced upon regional languages may be detrimental to current community attitudes towards the language. Especially in the case of France, the French language policy history has been one that emphasizes the monolingual state. So it emphasizes a the usage of one language that is standard France. And as you can see here, why this is so may be different across centuries. However, the French history has been one that emphasizes on the usage of standard French and standard French only. This effectively ignores the existence of regional languages, and it is detrimental to regional languages today. And part of its history becomes a cultural a cultural factor. So it becomes part of the culture to believe that those who speak regional languages are less worthy of standard French, and this has significant implications on community attitudes or speaker attitudes towards a language, as we will talk about later. So current revitalization efforts focus on four aspects, or I will be talking about these four aspects in respect to the current revitalization of the language. The first is new speakers. So new speakers are defined as adult learners that acquire the language through a second language, and there has been a pattern that wherever new speakers arise, there are more successful cases of language revitalization. So that is a positive outlook for Arpatan revitalization. One of the most noticeable organizations that work to encourage new speakers is the Alliance Culturelle Arpitania. Second of all, in the past decade or so, there has been an emphasis on incorporating Arpatan education into secondary and high school education. So in some schools, there are 2 hours per week in the schools devoted to Arpatan education. And in the regions of Savoie and Haute-Savoie, which I will show you a map now. So you can see on the left, um, it's a region within the area in which Arpatan is spoken. It is a significant re like area. However, it's not all of it, which we need to take into account of. Um, so let me just, sorry. So in these areas, there has been a emphasis on incorporating this into the educational system, and there's also been scholastic competitions that motivate students to learn the language, and there have even been parent associations devoted to Arpatan education. From the regional governments of the Rhône-Alpes region and the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region, there has been some financial aid directed to these regions. So you can see on the map on the right here, um, the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes department covers part of the region in which Arpatan is spoken. So again, it is not all of the speakers. So um, it is also something to take into account. And it is also noticeable that within the region, there are also other language revitalization projects going on. So apparently, the department has to also allocate financial resources to those projects as well. So financial aid, I would say, is pretty much limited, but the language does profit from a abundance of written materials such as dictionary, comic books, novels, and biographies. So a few impediments to revitalization is that, first of all, there has been great controversy over which orthographic system should be adopted. So right now there are two proposed orthographic systems, which means that the orthography is very much premature in this state. So right now the language is currently a spoken language and not a written one, which can be detrimental to its revitalization. Um, Second of all, as I mentioned, there is a high linguistic variety, which means that revitalization movements, if you want to preserve that linguistic variety, you need to base these projects on a very local scale. So this linguistic variety has also contributed to this lack of clear identity across the speakers as a community, which in some other cases of language revitalization all over the world, this sense of community and sense of identity is very crucial. Um, Arpatan, which lacks this sort of identity, uh, can be put at a disadvantage. And community attitudes are also very interesting in the case of Arpatan because due to the long history of depreciation and ignorance of regional languages, speakers are very pessimistic and depreciative of their own language. They think that standard language is of more value, not only in terms of linguistic beauty, but also economic value. They also associate the language as a long gone cultural past, a cultural heritage that do not necessarily see a chance or hopes of revitalization. So these community attitudes are essential for local activists because when you're carrying out these projects to revive the usage of languages, you need to take into account what speakers feel about their own language in order to make sure that projects um, receive in the participation of speakers and not just backlash or um, demotivation. So, a few positive conditions for revitalizations include the fact that in some areas of um, the region in which Arpitan is spoken, namely Savoie and Haute-Savoie, there is high motivation and political activism associated with Arpitan. So, especially in the region of Savoie, there has been recent political movements to separate itself from France, and there's also been calls that um, the government of France is endangering its rights, its human rights, and so based in this larger political background, um, the Arpatan is seen as a cultural symbol, as a regional symbol. So this sort of it's like this so if language revitalization can be tied into other social or political dynamics, this can be influential in revitalization. So there has also been a certain degree of regional government support um, of emphasizing the reconstruction of the regional identity. Um, from the national government side, there is also the General Delegation for the French language and the languages of France, which is a sort of like department within the French government devoted to the regional languages of France and preserving the linguistic variety as a part of the cultural heritage of France in general. So this is a very recent thing, and Arpatan fortunately is included in one of these languages. There's also sufficient documentation of the language, which is also crucial to revitalization. So at last we come to some recommendations on how to direct these efforts and where these revitalization efforts can go. So first of all, my first recommendation is to adopt double orthographies. The notion that it has to be either one orthographical system or another is actually hindering the revitalization more than contributing to it. So, a tolerance or acceptance of both orthographies may be the way forward. Second of all, it is obvious that community attitudes need to see a shift into a more positive, confident attitude towards the language rather than a pessimistic, um, depreciative, despising view of their own language. Um, this can be achieved through associating a regional identity or regional cultural heritage to the language. So maybe uh, emphasizing on the association of this language to other cultural symbols in the regional context. Third of all, it needs to attract community members through forms of rewards or motivations. This can either be financial or it can be like honorary titles. And revitalization organizations can see how this applies to their context on a case by case basis. Fourth of all, there needs to be a promotion of multilingualism. So in a lot of the language endangerment cases, there is this notion that it either has to be the dominant language or the um, sort of like or the endangered language. So in the context of Arpatan, some speakers may feel that it either has to be Standard French or Arpatan. However, this is not the case. Multilingualism is beneficial to an individual, both in terms of your in the career, and so um, what I'm trying to say is that um, multilingualism is a viable option, and it does not have to be there doesn't have to be a trade-off between standard French and Arpitan. And when revitalization organizations are thinking about these projects, they obviously need to emphasize on promoting this idea and emphasizing on the fact that it is easy to acquire such bilingualism. And lastly, um, this was a inspiration um that that came from after I observed um revitalization organization in Italy. So in Italy, the language situation is much better than that in France. There are more speakers and there are more intergenerational transmission in Italy, where the language is spoken. And one of the main observations is that in Italy, revitalization organizations are structured and centralized and um, very organized. So obviously, considering the fact that it has such high linguistic diversity in France, this may not seem an easy option, but revitalization activists should seek um, inspiration from other organizations as such. Thank you.